In a small, peaceful village surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, there lived a young man named Ethan. He was known throughout the area for his hard work and dedication to farming. Every day, rain or shine, Ethan could be found tending to his fields, feeding his animals, or fixing fences. His hands were rough from years of labor, but his heart was warm and full of kindness. Life in the village was simple, predictable even, and Ethan liked it that way. There weren't many surprises in his world, just the rhythm of nature and the satisfaction of honest work. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the hills, dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them a fierce storm. The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking trees and rattling rooftops. Rain poured down in sheets, turning dirt paths into muddy streams. Most villagers stayed indoors, huddled near their fireplaces, listening to the storm rage outside. But not Ethan. As much as he valued safety, he also cared deeply about his livestock. His cows, sheep, and chickens depended on him, especially during bad weather. Pulling on his heavy coat and boots, Ethan stepped out into the chaos. The cold rain stung his face, and the wind pushed against him as if trying to keep him from going forward. Still, he pressed on, determined to make sure everything was secure before the night grew darker. First, he checked the barn doors, ensuring they were tightly shut so no animals would escape. Then he walked along the fence line, making sure none of the posts had been knocked loose by the wind. As Ethan neared the edge of his property, where the land dropped off sharply into a steep cliff, he heard something unusual, a faint cry cutting through the roar of the storm. At first he thought it might just be the sound of branches snapping under the force of the wind. But then he heard it again, clearer this time, a desperate plea for help. His heart skipped a beat. Who could possibly be out here in such dangerous conditions? Ethan quickened his pace, his boots sinking into the soggy ground with each step. When he reached the cliff's edge, he stopped and peered over cautiously. What he saw made his blood run cold. Clinging to a tree whose roots were jutting out from the crumbling cliffside was a woman. Her fingers gripped the bark tightly, her knuckles white from the strain. Her clothes were soaked, plastered to her body, and her hair whipped wildly around her face. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, shouting something he couldn't quite hear over the storm. For a moment, Ethan froze, stunned by the sight. He had never seen this woman before. She didn't belong here. Not in his quiet little village, and certainly not dangling precariously from a cliff in the middle of a raging storm. But there was no time to waste wondering who she was, or how she had ended up in such a perilous situation. Without hesitation, Ethan sprang into action. He scanned the area quickly, looking for anything he could use to help. Spotting a length of sturdy rope coiled near his tractor, he grabbed it and hurried back to the cliff. The ground was slippery and the wind threatened to knock him off balance, but Ethan moved with purpose. He tied one end of the rope securely around a nearby tree trunk, testing its strength with a firm tug. Satisfied that it would hold, he looped the other end around his waist, leaving enough slack to lower himself down the cliff carefully. The descent was treacherous. Loose rocks and wet soil crumbled beneath his feet, and the wind tried to pull him backward. But Ethan focused all his energy on reaching the woman. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly now. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably in her late 20s and dressed in expensive-looking clothing that was completely unsuited for the outdoors. Despite her obvious fear, there was a glimmer of determination in her eyes, a refusal to give up, even in the face of death. "Hold on," Ethan shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm coming." The woman nodded weakly, her lips trembling as she struggled to respond. Ethan reached the tree and crouched down beside her, assessing the situation. The roots were holding, for now, but they wouldn't last much longer against the relentless assault of the wind and rain. Time was running out. "Can you grab the rope?" Ethan asked, holding it out toward her. She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. "My hands. I can't." Her voice broke, choked with emotion. Ethereal understood. Her grip on the tree was already tenuous. Letting go entirely to take the rope would be nearly impossible. Thinking quickly, he leaned forward, bracing himself against the tree trunk. "Wrap your arms around my neck," he instructed. "I'll get us both up." The woman hesitated for only a second before doing as he said. Her weight added to his own, made the climb back up the cliff even more difficult. But Ethan refused to let doubt creep in. One handhold at a time, he inched upward, using every ounce of strength he possessed. The rope dug into his waist and his muscles burned with exertion, but he kept moving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he pulled them both over the edge and collapsed onto solid ground. They lay there for a moment, gasping for breath as the storm continued to rage around them. When Ethan finally sat up, he turned to look at the woman. She was shaking uncontrollably, whether from fear, exhaustion, or the cold, he couldn't tell. Her makeup was smeared, her designer clothes ruined, but despite her disheveled appearance, there was something undeniably striking about her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. "You saved my life." Ethan nodded, brushing rainwater from his face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No, just scared and freezing." Realizing she needed warmth and shelter immediately, Ethan helped her to her feet and guided her toward his farmhouse. Along the way, she introduced herself as Victoria Langley. Ethan recognized the name instantly. It belonged to a famous millionaire, socialite who often appeared in magazines and on television. He had never imagined someone like her would end up in his remote village, let alone clinging to a tree on the edge of a cliff. When they reached the house, Ethan led Victoria inside and handed her a blanket. He started a fire in the hearth to chase away the chill while she wrapped herself tightly in the woolen fabric. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The crackling flames filled the silence as they both processed what had just happened. Finally, Victoria broke the quiet. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "If you hadn't come when you did." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. Anyone would have done the same, but Victoria shook her head firmly. "No, they wouldn't. You risked your life for me, a stranger. That's not something everyone would do." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he simply offered her a small smile. Little did he realize that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. After the storm had passed and the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Ethan stepped outside to check on his fields. The night before felt surreal, almost like a dream. He couldn't quite believe that he had rescued someone as famous and as seemingly out of place as Victoria Langley. Yet there she was, sleeping soundly in the guest room of his modest farmhouse, her expensive clothes draped over a chair to dry. Ethan shook his head slightly at the thought. His world was one of simplicity, dirt-streaked hands, early mornings, and the quiet rhythm of nature. Hers seemed to be the opposite, glamorous parties, designer outfits, and a life lived under the spotlight. As the day went on, Ethan couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy. What would happen now? Would Victoria leave as soon as she recovered? Or would she expect something more from him? He wasn't sure what to make of her gratitude, which had been sincere and heartfelt. But people like her, rich, powerful, used to getting their way, often didn't understand the value of simple acts of kindness. They saw everything through the lens of money and status. Still, Ethan pushed those thoughts aside. For now, all he could do was focus on taking care of her until she was ready to leave. When Victoria finally emerged from the guest room later that morning, she looked much better than she had the night before. Her hair was still damp, but she had managed to comb it neatly, and she wore an oversized flannel shirt of Ethan's that hung loosely on her frame. She smiled shyly when she saw him standing by the kitchen counter, sipping a cup of coffee. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "I hope I didn't disturb you." Ethan shook his head. "Not at all. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I owe you so much, Ethan. I don't even know where to begin." He waved off her words. "You don't owe me anything. You're safe now, and that's what matters." Victoria frowned slightly, clearly not satisfied with his response. She opened her mouth to argue but then closed it again, deciding against pressing the issue, for now. Instead, she glanced around the cozy kitchen, taking in its rustic charm. Everything about the space spoke of practicality and warmth. Wooden cabinets, mismatched plates stacked neatly on the shelves, and a vase of fresh wildflowers sitting on the table. "This is nice," she said after a pause. "It's peaceful here." Ethan chuckled lightly. "It's nothing special, but it suits me just fine." To his surprise, Victoria nodded earnestly. "I think I can see why. There's something comforting about knowing exactly where you belong." Her comment caught him off guard. It sounded almost wistful, as though she envied his sense of belonging. Even if only for a moment, Ethan decided not to dwell on it too much. After breakfast, he offered to drive her back to the main road so she could call for help. Her car had skidded off the narrow path near the cliff during the storm, leaving her stranded miles away from civilization. But instead of jumping at the chance to leave, Victoria surprised him yet again. "Actually," she said slowly, "would it be all right if I stayed here a little longer? Just until I figure out what to do next?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? My place isn't exactly luxurious." Victoria laughed softly. "That's kind of the point. I think I need a break from luxury right now." Though he didn't fully understand her reasoning, Ethan agreed. Over the next few days, Victoria settled into a routine that was completely foreign to her. She helped Ethan with small chores around the farm, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, and even attempting to milk a cow, which ended disastrously but left them both laughing. At first, Ethan worried that she might find the work tedious or beneath her, but to his amazement, she seemed genuinely interested in learning. She asked questions about how the crops were planted, why certain animals were kept together, and what tools were used for different tasks. One afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing a broken fence, Victoria turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "this is the first time in years I've felt useful." Ethan stopped hammering and looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" She sighed, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Back home, my life revolves around appearances, what I wear, who I'm seen with, how many likes I get on social media. It's exhausting. Here, none of that matters. You just do what needs to be done, and that's enough." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding dawning on him. Though their worlds were vastly different, he realized they shared a common desire: to live authentically, without pretense or pressure. For Ethan, farming provided that authenticity. For Victoria, perhaps this brief escape from her glamorous lifestyle offered a glimpse of what she truly wanted. As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. They spent evenings talking by the fire, sharing stories about their lives. Ethan told her about growing up in the village, the joys and challenges of farming, and his dreams of expanding his land someday. In return, Victoria opened up about her own struggles, how lonely it could be to live in the public eye, how hard it was to trust people when everyone seemed to want something from her. Despite their differences, they found comfort in each other's company. Ethan admired Victoria's resilience and her willingness to step outside her comfort zone, and Victoria, in turn, was captivated by Ethan's quiet strength and unwavering kindness. Slowly but surely, an unspoken connection formed between them, a mutual respect that neither had anticipated but both cherished deeply. However, not everyone in the village welcomed Victoria's presence. Whispers began to spread among the townsfolk, fueled by curiosity and suspicion. Some wondered why a wealthy socialite like her would choose to stay in such a remote place. Others speculated that she was using Ethan for some unknown reason, while a few outright accused her of being a distraction. Ethan heard the gossip, but chose to ignore it. He knew Victoria wasn't like that. Her gratitude and sincerity were real. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Victoria turned to Ethan with a serious expression. "Do you ever feel like people judge you based on things you can't control?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes, but I try not to let it bother me. At the end of the day, I know who I am, and that's what counts." Victoria smiled faintly, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. I wish I could be more like you. You already are, Ethan replied simply, just in your own way. His words lingered in the air, filling the silence between them with a quiet understanding. Though their time together was temporary, Ethan and Victoria both knew that this unlikely friendship had changed them in ways neither could have predicted. And as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, they sat side by side, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most extraordinary connections arise from the simplest moments. As the weeks passed, Victoria's presence in the village became less of a novelty and more of a familiar sight. At first, the townsfolk had been curious, some even skeptical, but over time they began to see her not as a glamorous outsider, but as someone who genuinely cared about fitting in. She made an effort to learn their names, ask about their families, and participate in small ways that showed she wasn't just passing through. Still, whispers lingered in the background. People couldn't help but wonder why a woman like Victoria, with all her wealth and fame, would choose to stay in such a quiet, unassuming place. For Ethan, these murmurs were hard to ignore, but he tried his best to focus on what mattered most, the growing bond between him and Victoria. One morning. As Ethan prepared to head out to the fields, Victoria joined him at the farmhouse door, wearing a pair of borrowed boots and carrying a basket. I thought I'd come along today, she said brightly. Maybe I can help you pick some vegetables for lunch. Ethan raised an eyebrow but smiled. You sure? It's not exactly glamorous work. Victoria laughed. That's the point, remember? Glamour doesn't grow crops. Her response made Ethan chuckle, and together they set off toward the vegetable patch. As they worked side by side, pulling carrots from the soil and gathering fresh herbs, Victoria asked questions about farming techniques, pest control, and crop rotation. Her curiosity was genuine, and Ethan found himself enjoying the opportunity to share his knowledge. He explained how the soil needed to rest between plantings, how certain plants thrived better when paired with others, and how weather patterns dictated much of what he did. To his surprise, Victoria listened intently, absorbing every detail. You're really good at this, she remarked after a while, brushing dirt off her hands. It's like you speak the language of the land. Ethan shrugged modestly. I've been doing it my whole life, it's not so special. But Victoria shook her head. No, it is. Most people wouldn't know where to start. You make it look easy, but I can tell it's not. Her words struck a chord with Ethan. He had always taken pride in his work, but hearing someone else recognize its value felt different, like a validation he hadn't realized he needed. For Victoria, watching Ethan move confidently through his daily routine was inspiring. She admired how grounded he was, how connected he seemed to the world around him. In contrast, her own life often felt fleeting and superficial, built on appearances, rather than substance. Later that afternoon, as they sat under the shade of a large oak tree eating sandwiches, Victoria brought up something that had been on her mind. Ethan, she began hesitantly, do you ever think about leaving here, about seeing other places? Ethan paused, considering the question. Sometimes, he admitted. But then, I think about how much I love this place. The land, the animals, the people. It's home. Why would I want to leave? Victoria nodded slowly, her gaze distant. I guess I understand that. But for me, I don't have a home like you do. My life is always moving, always changing. Nothing feels permanent. Her confession caught Ethan off guard. He had assumed that someone like Victoria, with access to endless resources and opportunities, would feel content. But hearing her talk about feeling rootless gave him a new perspective. Maybe you haven't found the right place yet, he suggested gently. Or maybe I haven't found the right person, Victoria replied softly, her eyes meeting his briefly before looking away. The comment hung in the air, unspoken but heavy, with meaning. Ethan didn't know how to respond, so he changed the subject, asking about her plans for the future. Victoria shrugged. Honestly, I'm not sure anymore. Part of me wants to go back to my old life, to the parties, the photo shoots, the travel. But another part of me, I don't know. Being here has made me realize how empty all of that can feel sometimes. Their conversation stayed with Ethan long after they returned to the farmhouse. He couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria was searching for something deeper, something she hadn't been able to find in her previous life. And though he admired her honesty, he also wondered if staying in the village was complicating things, not just for her, but for him too. Meanwhile, news of Victoria's extended stay reached her family and friends in the city. Her mother called one evening, her voice sharp with concern. "Victoria, darling, what on earth are you doing in that little village? You've been gone for weeks." "I'm fine, Mom," Victoria replied calmly, trying to keep the irritation out of her tone. "I needed a break, that's all." "A break?" her mother echoed incredulously. "From what? Your career? Your responsibilities? Honestly, sweetheart, this isn't like you." Victoria sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe I'm tired of being me. The version everyone expects me to be." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When her mother spoke again, her voice softened slightly. "I just worry about you, that's all. This farmer boy you've been spending time with, is he influencing you?" "He's not influencing me," Victoria shot back, suddenly defensive. "He's helping me see things differently. Isn't that what you wanted? For me to grow up and figure out who I am?" Her mother sighed heavily. "Of course I want that. But darling, be careful. Not everyone has your best interests at heart." The call ended shortly afterward, leaving Victoria unsettled. She knew her mother meant well, but the constant scrutiny wore on her. Back in the city, every decision she made was analyzed, dissected, and judged. Here in the village, no one cared about her last name or her bank account. They accepted her for who she was, or at least they were beginning to. Despite the challenges, Victoria continued to immerse herself in village life. She helped Mrs. Thompson bake pies for the upcoming harvest festival, assisted Mr. Jenkins with repairing a broken tractor, and even learned how to weave baskets from Mrs. Harper, the town's oldest resident. Each experience brought her closer to understanding the rhythms of rural living and to realizing how fulfilling it could be. For Ethan, watching Victoria embrace his world filled him with a mix of pride and unease. On one hand, he loved seeing her thrive outside her usual environment. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the growing tension between them. Their connection was undeniable, but it was also complicated. Could two people from such different worlds truly find common ground, or would their differences eventually drive them apart? One evening, as they walked along the edge of the cliff where they had first met, Victoria stopped suddenly and turned to face Ethan. "Do you ever think about us?" she asked quietly. Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" Victoria took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I mean, where does this go? What happens next?" Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't know, Victoria. We live in completely different worlds. I'm just a farmer. You're you." "But that's the thing," she insisted, stepping closer. "I don't care about any of that. All I care about is how I feel when I'm with you, like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life." Her words tugged at Ethan's heart, but he remained cautious. "And what about when you go back? When the cameras start flashing again and everyone expects you to be the same Victoria Langley they know? Will you still feel the same way then?" Victoria didn't have an answer. She wanted to believe that what they shared was strong enough to overcome anything, but deep down, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. For now, though, she chose to focus on the present. The simple joy of walking beside Ethan, the warmth of his smile, the steadiness of his presence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape, they stood there, silently, each lost in their own thoughts. Neither knew what the future held, but for the moment, that uncertainty didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had forged, a bond that transcended backgrounds, expectations, and fears. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, they both realized that sometimes the most meaningful relationships are the ones that challenge you to grow, to dream, and to imagine a life beyond what you once thought possible. The whispers in the village grew louder as Victoria's stay extended beyond what anyone had anticipated. At first, the townsfolk had been intrigued by her presence, but now skepticism began to creep in. Some accused her of playing games with Ethan's feelings, while others wondered aloud if she was using him for some hidden agenda. Even Mrs. Thompson, who had initially welcomed Victoria warmly, started dropping hints during their baking sessions. "You know, dear," she said one afternoon as they rolled out pie crusts, "Ethan is a good man. He deserves someone who will truly appreciate his way of life." Victoria forced a smile, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I do appreciate him, Mrs. Thompson. More than you know." But the older woman simply nodded, unconvinced. "Just be careful, dear. Hearts can get hurt when two people come from such different worlds." Victoria wanted to argue, to explain that she wasn't the shallow socialite everyone assumed she was. But how could she convince them when even she struggled to reconcile her old life with the new one she was beginning to envision? She cared deeply for Ethan, more than she had ever cared for anyone. But the weight of their differences loomed large. How could she possibly bridge the gap between her glamorous, high-profile existence and his simple, hard-working lifestyle? Meanwhile, back in the city, the gossip mill was spinning just as furiously. Tabloids caught wind of Victoria's prolonged absence and ran wild with speculation. Headlines screamed things like, "Heiress hides out in Hicksville," and "Is love blooming between Victoria Langley and a farmer?" Photos of Ethan surfaced online, grainy snapshots taken by nosy reporters who had managed to sneak into the village. Social media erupted with comments ranging from ridicule to outright disbelief. Friends called Victoria repeatedly, urging her to return before her reputation was ruined. Her best friend Clara finally tracked her down one evening. "Vic, what are you doing?" Clara demanded over the phone, her voice tinged with panic. "People are laughing at you. They're calling him your farm fling. Do you really want this scandal to define you?" "It's not a fling," Victoria snapped, her temper flaring. "And I don't care what they say." Clara sighed heavily. "That's exactly my point. You've always cared so much about what people think. Why are you throwing all of that away for this? For what?" Victoria shot back. "For happiness? For something real? Maybe it's time I stopped living for everyone else and started thinking about what I actually want." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Clara spoke again, her tone was softer. "I just don't want to see you get hurt. What happens when the novelty wears off? Are you really ready to give up everything for a life you barely understand?" Victoria didn't have an answer. The truth was, she didn't know if she could walk away from her old life entirely. But she also couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Ethan and the simplicity of his world. Every day spent in the village made her question whether the glittering facade of her former life was worth holding on to. As the pressure mounted, Ethan faced challenges of his own. His neighbors, once friendly and supportive, began treating him differently. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others offered unsolicited advice. "You're too good for someone like her," Mr. Jenkins grumbled one morning as they repaired a fence together. "She'll leave you high and dry the moment things get tough." Ethan clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He didn't need reminders of the obstacles ahead. He thought about them constantly. Still, he refused to let doubt overshadow the connection he shared with Victoria. She had shown him sides of herself that no magazine article or paparazzi photo could capture. Her vulnerability, her kindness, her desire for authenticity. Those qualities mattered far more to him than her wealth or status. Despite the growing tension, Ethan and Victoria tried to focus on the positives. They continued working side by side, finding solace in each other's company. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day, Victoria turned to Ethan with a determined look. "We need to figure this out," she said firmly. "If we're Going to make this work, we have to find a way to blend our worlds. Ethan frowned, leaning forward. What do you mean? I mean, maybe there's a way to bring parts of your life into mine, and vice versa. Something that honors both of us. Her suggestion sparked an idea in Ethan's mind. Over the next few days, they brainstormed possibilities, tossing around concepts until they landed on something promising: sustainable farming. Victoria owned several properties across the country, including a sprawling estate near the city that had lain unused for years. What if they transformed part of it into a farm? It could provide fresh produce to local communities, support small businesses, and create jobs, all while staying true to Ethan's values. Excited by the prospect, they began drafting plans. Victoria reached out to architects and agricultural experts while Ethan sketched layouts for crop fields and livestock pens. Together, they envisioned a space that combined modern innovation with traditional farming techniques, a testament to their shared commitment to making a difference. But even as their project gained momentum, cracks began to show in their relationship. The constant scrutiny took its toll and arguments became more frequent. One night, after a particularly heated exchange, Victoria stormed out of the farmhouse, tears streaming down her face. Ethan followed her outside, his heart heavy with regret. "Victoria, wait," he called, catching up to her near the edge of the cliff where they had first met. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap at you." She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "It's not just you, Ethan. It's everything. The gossip, the judgment, the feeling that no matter what I do, I'll never be enough." Ethan stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are enough, Victoria. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "But what about us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How do we keep fighting against all of this? Against everyone telling us we're wrong for each other?" Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "We fight because we believe in what we have. Because somewhere along the way you stopped being the millionaire, and I stopped being the farmer. We're just us." His words struck a chord deep within Victoria. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they couldn't control what others thought or said, but they could choose to stand together, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. Over the following days, they redoubled their efforts to turn their vision into reality. With Victoria's resources and Ethan's expertise, progress came quickly. News of their project spread, drawing attention not only from the village but also from environmental organizations eager to support sustainable initiatives. Slowly, but surely, the tide of public opinion began to shift. People started seeing Victoria not as an outsider, but as someone genuinely invested in improving their community. Even so, challenges remained. Victoria's family continued to pressure her to return to the city, threatening to cut her off financially if she refused. And Ethan faced lingering doubts from friends and neighbors who worried he was setting himself up for heartbreak. Yet, through it all, they clung to each other, determined to prove that love and purpose could transcend societal divides. One crisp autumn morning, as workers broke ground on their new farm, Victoria stood beside Ethan, watching the sun rise over the freshly tilled soil. "Do you think we can really do this?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We already are." Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, surrounded by possibility and promise, they allowed themselves to believe that anything was possible. Together, they had taken the first steps toward building a future that honored both their dreams, a future rooted in love, resilience, and the unwavering belief that sometimes the most extraordinary connections arise from the simplest acts of courage and compassion. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Ethan and Victoria. The sustainable farm they had envisioned together began taking shape, transforming the once empty estate into a vibrant hub of life and productivity. Fields were cleared, crops were planted, and livestock pens were constructed under Ethan's careful guidance. Meanwhile, Victoria handled the logistics, coordinating with architects, securing permits, and reaching out to local organizations to ensure their project aligned with community needs. It was hard work, but the sense of purpose kept them going. As the farm grew, so did its impact on the surrounding area. Locals who had initially been skeptical of Victoria's intentions started coming around, impressed by her dedication and willingness to roll up her sleeves alongside Ethan. She wasn't just funding the project, she was actively involved, learning the ropes and contributing in meaningful ways. Children from nearby schools visited for educational tours. Families came to buy fresh produce at affordable prices, and unemployed villagers found new opportunities as farmhands or caretakers. What had begun as a dream, shared between two people, quickly became a beacon of hope for an entire community. But despite their successes, challenges persisted. The pressure from Victoria's family reached a breaking point when her father paid an unexpected visit to the farm one chilly morning. He arrived in a sleek black car, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel driveway as he stepped out. His sharp suit and stern expression stood in stark contrast to the earthy simplicity of the farm. Ethan greeted him politely, though unease prickled at the back of his neck. "Victoria," her father said without preamble, his voice clipped and authoritative. "We need to talk." Victoria straightened, steeling herself for the confrontation. "Dad, I'm busy right now. Can it wait?" "No, it cannot," he replied firmly. Turning to Ethan, he added, "May we speak privately?" Ethan hesitated but nodded, stepping aside to give them space. He trusted Victoria to handle the situation, though part of him worried about what might happen next. Inside the farmhouse, Victoria faced her father across the kitchen table. His disapproval radiated like heat from a fire. "This has gone far enough," he said bluntly. "You're throwing your life away for this." "For what?" Victoria shot back, her voice rising. "For something real? For a chance to make a difference instead of living my life according to someone else's expectations?" Her father sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. You have responsibilities. To our family, to the business, to your legacy. This farmer and his little project are distractions." "They're not distractions," Victoria exclaimed, her hands trembling with emotion. "This is who I am now, or at least who I want to become. Dad, I've spent my whole life trying to live up to your standards, chasing after approval I'll never fully earn. But here with Ethan, I finally feel like I belong. Like I matter." Her words seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable, his rigid composure faltering. Then, with a heavy sigh, he leaned back in his chair. "And what about him? Does he feel the same way? Or is he using you to climb the social ladder?" Victoria bristled at the accusation. "How dare you say that? Ethan would never—" "I'm just being realistic," her father interrupted. "People like him don't usually mix with people like us. Sooner or later something will give, and when it does, you'll be the one left picking up the pieces." Though his words stung, Victoria refused to let them shake her resolve. "If something goes wrong, then so be it. At least I'll know I tried. But I won't walk away from this, not from the farm, not from Ethan, and certainly not because you told me to." Her father studied her for a long moment before standing abruptly. "Very well, do what you must, but don't come crying to me when things fall apart." With that, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing through the house. Victoria sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. When Ethan entered a few minutes later, finding her slumped over the table, he immediately pulled her into a comforting embrace. "He doesn't understand," Victoria sobbed. "He thinks I'm making a mistake." Ethan held her tightly, stroking her hair. "Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But what matters is that you understand. That's all that counts." His reassurance calmed her, and together, they decided to focus on the positives. The farm was thriving. The community was rallying behind them, and their bond was stronger than ever. Even the gossip in the village had quieted down, replaced by admiration for what they had accomplished. By spring, the farm was fully operational. Rows of vegetables stretched across the land, chickens clucked happily in their coops, and cows grazed peacefully in pastures. A grand opening event drew hundreds of visitors, including journalists eager to tell the story of how a millionaire heiress and a humble farmer had teamed up to create something extraordinary. Photos of Ethan and Victoria working side by side appeared in magazines and newspapers, accompanied by glowing articles highlighting their partnership and vision. Yet even amid the celebration, Ethan and Victoria knew their journey wasn't without sacrifices. They had both given up parts of their old lives to build this new one together. For Victoria, it meant stepping away from the glitz and glamour of high society and embracing a simpler, more grounded existence. For Ethan, it meant leaving behind the solitude of his previous life and navigating the complexities of love and compromise. Neither regretted their choices, but they understood that their relationship required constant effort and communication. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Victoria turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll always face challenges like this? From people who don't understand us?" Ethan smiled softly, taking her hand in his. "Probably, but we've proven we can handle them, haven't we? Together." Victoria nodded, squeezing his hand. Together. In the months and years that followed, their farm continued to flourish, becoming a model for sustainable agriculture and community development. Ethan and Victoria married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors who had come to love and respect them both. Their union symbolized the blending of two worlds, wealth and simplicity, ambition and authenticity, that many had thought impossible to reconcile. Through it all, Ethan and Victoria remained steadfast in their commitment to each other and their shared mission. They taught others that true fulfillment comes not from material success or societal approval, but from living authentically and working towards something greater than oneself. Their story inspired countless people to seek connections beyond surface-level differences, proving that love, determination, and a shared vision can overcome even the greatest obstacles. And so, in the heart of the countryside, where fields stretched endlessly toward the horizon and the air carried the scent of fresh earth, Ethan and Victoria built a life rooted in purpose and partnership. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was theirs. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Though their farm had become a thriving success, Ethan and Victoria knew that life would always present new challenges. The world outside their little haven hadn't stopped spinning, and the expectations placed on them by society still lingered in the background. But instead of letting those pressures weigh them down, they chose to face each obstacle with resilience, determination, and an unwavering belief in their shared vision. One summer morning, as the sun rose over the rolling hills, Ethan stood at the edge of a newly planted field, surveying the rows of corn and tomatoes glistening with dew. Beside him, Victoria held a clipboard, jotting notes about crop yields and harvest schedules. They worked seamlessly together now, their roles complementing one another perfectly. Ethan handled the hands-on aspects of farming, plowing fields, tending animals, and troubleshooting equipment issues, while Victoria managed logistics, marketing, and partnerships with local businesses. Their teamwork was a testament to how far they'd come since that stormy night on the cliffside. Back then, they were strangers from vastly different worlds brought together by chance. Now they were partners in every sense of the word, united not only by love but also by a shared commitment to making a difference. That day, however, marked the beginning of a new chapter. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, a delivery truck pulled into the driveway, its sides emblazoned with the logo of a major food distributor. Out stepped a sharply dressed man carrying a briefcase, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel path. He introduced himself as Mr. Carter, a representative from one of the largest grocery chains in the country. "We've been following your project closely," he said, with a polite smile, extending his hand to Ethan and Victoria. "What you're doing here is remarkable, not just for the quality of your produce but for the positive impact you're having on the community. We'd like to discuss the possibility of partnering with you." Ethan exchanged a glance with Victoria, both surprised and intrigued. While they had always envisioned selling their goods locally, this offer opened doors to something much bigger. Still, they approached it cautiously, knowing that scaling up could bring complications they weren't prepared for. Over the next few days, they met with Mr. Carter multiple times, discussing terms and exploring what a partnership might look like. On one hand, it was an incredible opportunity. Their farm could reach thousands of customers across the country, providing fresh, sustainable produce while supporting local farmers. On the other hand, it meant stepping further into the spotlight, something neither of them particularly relished. Victoria voiced her concerns during one of their late-night conversations. "What if we lose control of our mission?" she asked, pacing the living room floor. "What if we start prioritizing profit over purpose?" Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I get where you're coming from, but maybe there's a way to grow without losing sight of why we started this in the first place." Together, they decided to take the leap, but on their own terms. They negotiated a contract that allowed them to maintain full creative control over the farm's operations, ensuring that sustainability and community support remained their top priorities. In return, the grocery chain agreed to promote their story, highlighting the farm's eco-friendly practices and ethical values. The partnership proved transformative. Orders poured in from cities far and wide, and soon, their farm became known as a model for ethical agriculture. Local farmers began reaching out, eager to learn from their methods. Ethan and Victoria welcomed them with open arms, hosting workshops and sharing resources to help others adopt sustainable practices. What had once been a personal dream had evolved into a movement, one that inspired change far beyond their small corner of the world. But growth came with its own set of challenges. As demand increased, so did the workload. Long hours in the fields left Ethan physically exhausted, while Victoria juggled calls with distributors, journalists, and potential collaborators. At times, the stress threatened to strain their relationship. Arguments flared occasionally, fueled by fatigue and frustration. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Ethan found Victoria sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the fields bathed in moonlight. Her shoulders slumped and her usual spark seemed dimmed. "You okay?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. She sighed, shaking her head. "I don't know, Ethan. Sometimes I feel like we're losing ourselves in all of this. Like we're chasing something we can't even keep up with." Ethan reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We're not losing ourselves, Vic. We're just growing. And yeah, it's hard. But remember why we started this. To make a difference. To show people that another way is possible." His words reminded her of their original purpose, reigniting the fire within her. "You're right," she admitted softly. "It's easy to forget when everything feels so overwhelming." From that moment on, they made a conscious effort to prioritize balance. They hired additional staff to share the workload, allowing them to carve out time for themselves and each other. Weekends became sacred, reserved for quiet mornings, long walks, and simply enjoying the life they had built together. As the years passed, their farm continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the region's agricultural landscape. Schools organized field trips to teach students about sustainable farming. Families visited for weekend markets, and volunteers from around the world came to lend a hand. Ethan and Victoria's story spread globally, inspiring countless individuals to rethink their relationship with food, land, and community. Through it all, they never lost sight of what truly mattered: their connection to each other and to the land. They celebrated milestones together: the birth of their first child, the expansion of the farm to include renewable energy initiatives, and the establishment of a scholarship fund to support aspiring young farmers. Each achievement reinforced their belief that collaboration and compassion could create lasting change. On the 10th anniversary of the farm's founding, they hosted a grand celebration. Hundreds of guests gathered beneath twinkling string lights, feasting on dishes made from ingredients grown right there in the fields. Laughter filled the air as old friends and new acquaintances mingled, sharing stories and dreams for the future. As the festivities wound down, Ethan took the microphone to address the crowd. Standing beside Victoria, who held their toddler son, in her arms, he spoke from the heart. "When we started this farm, we didn't know where it would lead. All we knew was that we wanted to do something meaningful, to leave the world a little better than we found it. Today I see proof that anything is possible when you believe in yourself and in each other." The crowd erupted in applause, but Victoria's eyes stayed locked on Ethan's. She saw in them the same determination and kindness that had drawn her to him all those years ago. No matter how much their lives had changed, some things remained constant: their love, their resilience, and their unshakable faith in the power of hope. Later that night, as they stood together under the stars, watching fireworks light up the sky, Victoria leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that storm hadn't hit?" she asked quietly. Ethan chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. "I think about it sometimes. But honestly, I'm glad it did. If it hadn't, I wouldn't have met you." Victoria smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Me too." In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the land they had nurtured and the life they had built together, they felt a profound sense of peace. Their journey had been far from easy, filled with challenges and sacrifices, but through perseverance and love, they had created something extraordinary, a legacy rooted in authenticity, purpose, and the simple joys of everyday life. And as the final fireworks faded into the night, leaving behind a sky dotted with stars, Ethan and Victoria knew one thing for certain: no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. Together, they had proven that even the most unlikely beginnings could blossom into something beautiful if you dared to follow your heart.